Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of current and classic horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews and discussions may include spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy.
Who is this? We have to get out of here. Hello, Jonathan. This is our future. Where am I? Sammy, why don't you show the new guy how it works?
Please. I can't do it again.
All right, I'll help. The government have been using your fears to control the population.
They're weaponizing fear?
Let's get you hooked up. We need to get out of this place.
Anthology horror has always been a problematic subgenre to get right. Finding the perfect balance between multiple directors' styles and incorporating them into a coherent narrative is a daunting task. A task that PHOBIAS grapples with to mixed results. Written and directed by Camilla Bailey, Marietta Lee Go, Joe Sill, Jess Varley, and Chris Von Hoffman, PHOBIAS, which is currently streaming on video on demand, is 5 segments that are glued together by a shared narrative framework. A mad doctor is kidnapping people suffering from extreme phobias with the intent of extracting and weaponizing their fear. Each of the film's 5 segments explore the phobia-centric predicament that landed each patient into Outpost 37. These segments are broken up by brief scenes of patients in the outpost being subjected to cruel, fear-extracting procedures. As far as the anthology horror film's premises go, PHOBIAS is sound. The overarching narrative has a bit of an X-Men New Mutants vibe, as the government is experimenting on that which they don't fully understand. While this is never fleshed out to the degree I'd like it to be, it gets the job done well enough that all the pieces fit together and allows the construction of the film's narrative arc to feel purposeful rather than aimless. It's the segments themselves that begin to show the limitations of the restrictiveness of anthology horror's framework that the film suffers from. The reality is that there simply isn't enough time allotted within the film to explore each segment to its full extent. At just 85 minutes long, most segments feel like they end just as they begin to get going. For example, the opening segment, Robophobia, which is a fear of artificial intelligence, in which Johnny, played by Leonardo Nam, befriends an AI program, it feels cut short just as the true horror begins to set in. What begins as a promising friendship evolves into the AI hitching a ride within Johnny's body and helping him to enact revenge against those who committed a hate crime against him. It doesn't take long for the AI to become power-hungry and evolve into a threatening physical manifestation. But just as this new and frightening supernatural development begins, the segment ends. The segment features a solid performance from Leonardo Nam, and a fun, if not familiar premise that I wanted more from is a strong start for the film. It's just a shame the other segments never really topped this initial segment for me. This bleeds into introducing Outpost 37 and Dr. Wright, played by Ross Partridge, the mad doctor who runs the facility. Here, Johnny meets the other patients having their fear extracted, and this triggers flashbacks which serve as each segment of the film. And now for a brief intermission. If you've been enjoying this episode of Daily Horror Habit, please take a moment to subscribe to the show on your preferred streaming platform or leave us a review on iTunes. And thank you for your continued support, and I hope you enjoy the remainder of today's horrifying episode. I like the concept of connecting all of the film's segments rather than them merely being scary stories that lack any true sense of unity. It's just that these in-between segments are so short-lived that they barely justify their inclusion, if only to keep PHOBIA's narrative on the tracks. While the film's overarching narrative wasn't as fleshed out as I would have liked, I was impressed by the amount of variety found within each phobia segment. For instance, segment number 2, Veophobia, a fear of driving, is a blending of Bonnie and Clyde and the killer car horror of Christine, in which the spirit of a murdered man comes back to haunt the woman who killed him. Segment number 3, Ephibophobia, a fear of youth, sees a teacher fall prey to a home invasion perpetrated by vengeful ex-students, a teacher's true worst nightmare. Segment number 4, Hoplophobia, a fear of firearms, follows a cop suffering from severe PTSD after an accidental shooting. And the final segment, number 5, Atelophobia, a fear of imperfection, sees a woman drugging her coworkers and taking their best bits and adding them to her collection. There is a refreshing attention throughout the 5 segments to ensure no one segment feels like the one that preceded it. This allows Phobias to explore multiple horror subgenres, providing a variety of scares and experiences. Via Phobias' pairing of crime and supernatural makes for a creepy commentary on relationships and spooky revenge. Ephibophobia presents a killer dynamic between youthful assailants and a terrified but flawed victim. Hoplophobia is a commentary on the ramifications of lethal force and including some well-choreographed violence. And finally, Atelophobia features what is easily the most visceral, disturbing body horror segment of the film, which makes for a wonderfully nasty end chapter. For fans of anthology horror like myself, they will undoubtedly get more out of Phobia's various blending of horrors. That said, Phobias never manages to shake its time restraints, more often than not cutting its true potential far too short. And the somewhat underdeveloped structure, tying all the segments together, makes Phobias a promising and weird experiment that falls short of its true potential. Phobias is one of the few films that I wish were longer, more time to establish these characters, their plight, which would not only heighten our emotional investment in them, but also allow the viewer to reside within this creepy as hell world that's bristling with a variety of sci-fi horror influences. And, more opportunity of scares, which the film doesn't necessarily always rise to its true potential at. Phobias will resonate with hardcore anthology horror fans with an inkling for Black Mirror, but horror fans, for those looking for the next terrifying must-see chapter of anthology horror, Phobias is going to miss that mark. And that'll do it for another episode of Daily Horror Habit. I'll see you guys tomorrow for another daily horror movie review. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service and follow the show on Instagram at Daily Horror Habit and on Twitter at Daily Horror Pod for episode updates. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.